What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over the credits screens. We're going to be adding a credits button to the main menu. We're going to be able to click into it and show off the entire credits widget. So I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters, my YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys for everything. I really appreciate you, and I'm trying to do more to incorporate you guys. So here's the credits screen, and you guys are on it first. Thank you so much once again for everything. Now, once the credits finish rolling, the menu will close itself. So we'll go through the credits, and it will end itself and return to the main menu. I can also go into the credits and speed them up by holding a button, slow them down by holding a button, and when I release either button, they go back to default speed. If I would like to skip the credits, I can press the confirm button, and we'll skip through to the end of the credits, which defaults us to the main menu. We're going to set all this up today. It's going to be a really fun episode because I actually love working on credits. There are a bunch of ways to do this. So I'm going to show you some different techniques in this episode, and you can hopefully come up with the best credits for your game. Before we get started, guys, if you want to get caught up in the series, this is episode 157 of the fighting game tutorial series. We still have a really long way to go, but we've come so far from the beginning. So like I said, if you want to get caught up, I'll leave this playlist right here in the top right corner. You can check out everything we've done to date. You can see how we've gotten the actual game here, the menu, the sounds, the music, everything we've got in, all that working together. It's all shown in these episodes. Alternatively, if you don't care about that, but you do care about the credits, I want to link you to this episode right here, which is where we initially set up the main menu. That is going to be important because we're going to be incorporating the credits button and screen from the main menu screen today. We can go ahead and get started. This is all going to be in blueprints today, so we're not going to use the code. Let's skip to the main menu screen widget. So this is my main menu, as you saw. Before in the series, we had story, arcade versus practice, settings, and the quit button. I've now added the credits button. For those of you that have followed the series, you're probably familiar with how I do this. But just to give you a quick rundown, I've added a button, positioned it where I wanted, set the image that I wanted. Then that button has text on it, which I have set to my specific parameters for the font, and I've written out text right here in the content section. So now we have this credits button on our main menu screen widget. And if we go into the graph, let's go to the event graph. Now, anytime we add a new button on this widget, or a lot of our widgets with our custom navigation, we need to know how many different inputs there are so we know which ones we can navigate to. And with that, I have this max selections variable that keeps track of all the different buttons on here. So before, we had a max selections of 6 because we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 options. But now, with credits being added, we have 7 buttons on the main menu. So max selections needs to increase. It was originally 6. I've now turned it to 7. We also need to actually fill out the logic to be able to hover over this button and select it as well, which is pretty easy. I'm not going to change really any of the logic that we have in the main menu screen. I'm just going to be adding to it. So if we go to our move selection border function, this is where we actually apply the effects that we put for the buttons. When the player is hovering over that button, we give it that blue tint that you saw. That way we know what button we're hovering over, which option we're selecting. To do that, we determine what selection we're on in the menu and then take the correct button. So in this, we had a switch on int that had 0 through 5 for the 6 possible options. I've now hit add pin and have 0 through 6. So instead of quit button being at index 5, quit button is now index 6. Instead, I put the credits button at index 5. Might look a little bit confusing, but I promise if you've done this menu, it's not too confusing. And even if you haven't, I'm going to cover it right now. So essentially, index 5 We're starting at 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Index 5 is credits, 6 is quit. So if I pull off switch on int off of index 5, it is this line right here, the second from the top, which goes into this node. To get this, I simply grab my credits button, get it, drag off of it, type set style, choose the one under variables appearance set style, split the widget style struct pin, split the widget style normal, and then I get what I have here. From here, I just choose the image that I want it to be, which is my button P1 hover variation 1, and I draw it as a box. After that, I continue with my regular flow, which is to call clear past selections. So I clear up any other selections that were previously hovered. That way they go back to their default not selected state. Now, we already had this logic for quit button, so the only difference here is that you drag off of index 6 on the switch on int. It is my top line here, and plug it in there. So we've just inserted the credits button here. It's super simple, nothing to worry about. With this one done, we can go to clear past selections now. Let's go to that. Now, clear past selections was set up like this, where we were basically going through determining if we were hovering over this selection currently, and if we're not, we're resetting it to the default color of the button, which is that gray unselected button. Now, in the series, we have come up with a better way for this, but I'm not going to go and transfer the entire main menu over that method right now, as this does work perfectly fine. It's just a little bit more work on the back end here, but otherwise it functions basically the same. So we had up to clear selection 6, which we're actually leaving now, but we're just going to add an additional one, which is clear selection 7. So what I'd like to do is actually just copy this and paste it again. But if you don't want to do that, you can write it out manually. And we have the current selection we're on, and then we want to make sure that we are not on the specific index that we mentioned. So again, quit is index 6 here, starting from 0. So now we don't want to end at 5, but instead we want to end at 6. We put in index 6 here, so if we're not equal to 6, drag this out to a branch. If it's true that we're not equal to 6, then we want to clear our new selection. You won't have clear selection 7 yet because we haven't set it up. You can go into the event graph, go to where your other clear selections are. These are where we reset all the buttons that we highlighted to that hovered mode to their standard one. And so we're going to add a new custom event at the end here. After clear selection 6, I'm going to add custom event. And here, I'm going to rename it to be clear selection 7. Now, clear selection 6 was previously the quit button. So I can copy this logic, paste it over here, and use that for clear selection 7. For clear selection 6, you can leave this set style node, or do it manually like we did in the move selection borders function. But instead of the quit button, we're going to use our credits button. Now, once you have clear selection 7 here, you can go back into clear past selections, and then you want to call clear selection 7. Hook it up just like this to the end of that function, and now that function is also done. Lastly, we need to set up confirm selection, and confirm selection is going to actually spawn the credits widget when we select the credits option on the main menu. So we come into confirm selection, and similarly to how we set up move selection border where we determined what button we were on and then highlighted it, we're going to do that for our confirm selection logic. And again, we're inserting credits above the quit here. So I've added a new pin to the switch on int. Index 6 now goes down to the quit logic. This has all remained the same. Instead, disconnect 5, index 5 from it, and 5 is going to go into new logic now. So index 5, our credits button, is going to create the credits widget, add it to the viewport, and remove the main menu screen from the parent. We need to, of course, create the credits widget to be able to spawn it, so let's go ahead and do that now. Go to wherever you want to create your widget for your credits. Go to Add New, User Interface, Widget Blueprint. Once you make it, you'll have to name it. I just called mine Credits. Very simple. Now, right away, if you go back to your main menu screen after creating it, we can finish this up and then work solely on the credits. You don't have to have anything in your Credits widget to spawn it, so just type Create Widget, and then you're going to want to select the Credits widget you just made. Drag off the return value and add it to the viewport. This will allow the player to see the Credits widget. And that's what I've got right here. Lastly, we want to call Remove from Parent, with the target being Self. So Remove from Parent actually allows us to remove the main menu screen widget that we're on. This is so the main menu screen will not be taking up any sort of real estate when we come back. So say we go into the main menu, and then we are to confirm and come out. We open a new menu. Now, if you want to keep your tracking on the credits screen when you come out, you notice I enter the credits screen, I finish my credits, and I'm back up at Story button up at the top of the main menu. If you'd like to do that, you can do it how we did it on the settings screen widget, where we actually kept the menu open and just stopped listening for input on the specific actions. This is also a very viable method of doing it. With that out of the way, we can now go into our credits widget as we are able to spawn it from the game. Everything else we're going to do today is going to be with this widget, so it's going to be specific to the credits, and it's going to be new. It's not going to be working off of old logic. Now in our credits widget, I have it set up like this, but you can customize it however you'd like. This is just a default template I'm using for the credits. So what I've done is I've added an image that I've called the background image. I've anchored it to the full size of the widget with no offset, so it covers the entire widget. Put it at a Z order of -10, just an arbitrary value that I know is going to be behind everything. And then I don't have an actual image I'm using right now, but what I did do is set the color and opacity to just black. Now, I haven't done anything else with this. So that's my background image. I also have a title in here that is just text. Now, if you're doing this in Unreal Engine 4, like I am, you'll have a canvas panel by default. But if you're not, that's okay. So if you're in Unreal Engine 5, you won't have a canvas by default. You can get one by typing in canvas panel and just dragging it directly onto the widget here. Or you can actually do this without one, up to you. But I would recommend putting one in for organizational reasons so you can follow this method. We are going to be converting this series to UE5 in the future, and it will also make it easier if we have the canvas panel in there already. But it is entirely up to you, especially if you're already familiar with how to set up widgets. You don't have to follow this exact hierarchy. Just letting you know. So for the title that just says credits, I just have text that I brought into the canvas panel. I called it Credits Title, anchored it to the top center, gave it a top position offset with an alignment of 0.5, which means it's not using the top left corner for the coordinates of where to create this text, but instead the middle. I sized the text box to the contents of the text. Then I've set my different fonts and outline sizes. And there's my title. Now, those things aren't needed. They're just for appearance. But here is the important part of today's episode. So the actual scrolling and the text for the credits. Not the title, but the actual names and all of that good stuff. For this, I've decided to do it using a scroll box and a vertical box. So the scroll box is what's going to be used to actually scroll the text, which makes sense. The vertical box is going to hold the individual contents. Vertical boxes are particularly nice for this because they can hold different objects within them. So we can use a vertical box and we can have text, we can have images, we can have different things like that to apply more than just a standard text box. A lot of credits will have these other things in them, whether it be logos for other companies they work with or people who they're trying to advertise, the engine they used, different things like that. That can all be shown off in the vertical box. Depending on how you set it up, you may have to be more intricate than we have here, and we will most likely revisit these credits in the future to make them more advanced. However, a vertical box and a scroll box are good enough for now. So I would recommend adding a scroll box to the screen. And when you add it in here, you'll have to resize it to whatever size it is that you want. This looked like a good size for me because I figured I could have some actual artwork for the background image, and the text could be within this box. But you can do whatever you want with it. The size doesn't matter. Here are my settings for the scroll box. This is anchored to the top center yet again. And I've selected these sizes, these offsets. I've hidden the scroll bar because there is a scroll bar that actually comes with every scroll box, but we don't want to show that while we are rolling the credits. Otherwise, it would look a little bit strange, at least in my opinion. So I've just set the scroll bar visibility to be hidden. And there we go. Now, call this something that you'll know what it is. I called it the credit scroll box, and make sure you make it a variable because we are going to use it in the graph. After you've done that, you can add a vertical box to the scroll box. Very easily, actually. Just type vertical box and drag it in or on the scroll box. It will automatically make it a child like it did here. We don't need to use this one in the graph today, so you don't have to make it a variable, but I do recommend naming it. So I just called this credits vertical box. Now, I actually didn't change anything on here. We just need the vertical box with its default functionality. That is enough for today. Now we're going to want to add our individual elements. So for me, I put all the text that was related to the topic under one text box. So for example, I have special thanks to my Patreon supporters, and then I have special thanks to my YouTube membership supporters. All the names are included with that topic. But you could do this any way you want. You could separate every single name into a piece of text. You could separate this into different files that you load in and pull the text from. You could pull it from a data table. You could do this so many different ways. I am just going to have each category, like I said, the special thanks to my Patreon supporters, that's the category, and all the names in one text box. And then I have my other text, my other category with my other text box information here. So these are just both plain text elements that I've put as children of the credits vertical box. So if you're doing this method along with me, drag the text onto the vertical box, and you can do this as many elements as you want. You can also drag images onto the vertical box, like I said, and other things, really. If you want to do anything else for any reason, you could do that as well. Now, the vertical box is going to put these elements in the order that they are within the vertical box. So if I put the Patreon text above the YouTube membership text, it's literally going to go through the Patreon text and put the YouTube membership text below it. So take a minute, fill out all your text, or at least some of your text. You don't have to finish it all now. You can update this as frequently as you'd like. Once you have some elements in this vertical box, though, we can go into our graph and start filling out some actual logic here. So there's two main parts here in our graph that we're going to fill out today. We're going to fill out the event construct, which is going to be the controls over our credits. So like being able to move faster or slower, being able to exit out of the credits altogether. And then we have our tick, which is what's going to cause the scroll to occur in the first place. The more important one is the tick, so we'll start with that. Now, you probably have this event in here in the graph to begin with, but if you don't, just type event tick, select it here, and you'll get this node. Now, tick runs every frame, and it has an in delta time, which is how much time has passed since the last tick. We're going to use that time with a manual variable that we set for the default speed, and we're essentially going to get where we are in the scroll box to the end of the scroll box, and we're going to set the scroll offset based on this rate. It looks like a lot's going on here, but I promise it's actually not too bad. So when you're ready, go ahead and make a variable. That is a float, and I've called it scroll speed. Compile that, and scroll down to the default value section and set the scroll speed to be 100 or whatever you want. But 100 is a good starting value. So I'd recommend doing that because you'll know you might have trouble knowing if it's working if you put your credits off screen and then you wait for them to scroll. Now, what I like to do when I get in here is just test the initial view of the credits, because what I've done here, it's not as easy to tell with the way this is set up. So I have this scroll box, and it is basically the size of the screen minus where the title is, right? This is because I want the credits to come up from the bottom. Instead of fading in the middle somewhere or already being on here when we get into the menu, I want them to come up from the bottom. So I have the scroll box all the way to the bottom of this widget here. The vertical box, however, is actually much taller. The vertical box contains all of the contents of the elements, the text that we put within it, as well as some additional padding that I've put that I'll explain later in the episode. And so the vertical box is a lot higher. Now, the vertical box itself doesn't have any padding on it, but these text boxes do. Again, I will explain that later after we get the scroll working. But I wanted to point this out because you'll notice that my text isn't actually on my widget here. So that's why I recommend that you have a scroll speed in here by default that's relatively high, like 100. That way, if it's off screen to start, you're not waiting forever for the text to come up. Again, what we want to do here is take our scroll speed, take in the time that has passed, and multiply them together to get the rate at which we are moving. So to do this, it's very simple actually. Grab scroll speed, get it, and then multiply by float times float, and pass in delta time. Now in my case, scroll speed is actually on the bottom, but it doesn't matter which one you do here. It's going to come out to the same result. This is your rate that we are going to be moving through the credits. Now, we need to use our scroll box to get the current scroll and to get the end scroll so we know where the end of the scroll box is. So we can grab our credit scroll box, drag off of it, get scroll offset, and get scroll offset of end. And that's what I've done here. Now, the scroll offset is the current offset that we're at. So we need to add the current offset to the rate that we are offsetting. So drag off the return value of get scroll offset, hit the plus sign, float plus float, that's what we want. And then you want to drag in the result of scroll speed times in delta time. Okay, I've got some reroute nodes, but that's essentially what we're doing. The plus is taking this return value and this return value, adding them together. This is where we are going to be at next, the new scroll value. But there's a few things we have to check. We want to make sure that the new scroll value is greater than or equal to 0. 0 is the top in this case. So if the new result is greater than or equal to 0, we know we can keep going. We're not below the minimum value. We also have to make sure we're not above the maximum value. So we have to make sure we are less than or equal to the end of the scroll box. Okay, so we do greater than, equal to, off that plus node here, and just leave it at 0. Then we drag off the plus node again and do less than, equal to. And drag in the scroll offset of end. Now there's 3 different set scroll offsets here for 3 different scenarios. Scenario 1 is that we are above the minimum, below the maximum, and so we want to set the scroll offset to that value. Scenario 2 is that we are above the minimum, but greater than the maximum, so we want to set our scroll offset to the maximum. We don't want to go past that. Scenario 3 is that we are below the minimum, so we want to default to the minimum, which happens to be 0. Those are our 3 cases. So let's go through these branches now. All right, we've covered all these nodes. we need a branch off of the greater than or equal to, a branch off the less than or equal to. That's what you're seeing here. Drag off this, type branch, and then connect it, event tick, to that first branch. Now, again, this is saying we are above the minimum value. We are not below the minimum. So if we are above or equal to the minimum value, this will return true. Now we have to check and make sure that we are less than the maximum value. So drag off this one, branch, select that. True goes into the next branch. And so now you'll have these two linked together. Now, if the initial branch returned false, that is where we want to set our scroll to the minimum, right? That is scenario 3, where we have the scroll offset being 0. So if we are less than 0, we want to set it to a default of 0. So off the first branch, we call set scroll offset. To get this function, you can drag off your scroll box, type set scroll offset, and we're going to force it to 0. It defaults to 0, so you actually don't have to enter anything. Just make sure that you drag off your branch, your false result of your first branch, and drag it into that set scroll offset. Now, if the first branch was true, we go into the second branch. If the second branch is true, that means we are less than the maximum. So we were greater than the minimum, and we're less than the maximum, so we need to use the scroll offset that we will now be at. That is the raw value that comes from this float plus float node. So if we drag off the float plus float node, again, I have reroute nodes here to make it a little bit cleaner, but this result right here is what's going to go into this scroll offset. That was scenario 1. Now, scenario 2 is the last one we have to deal with. So if we are above the minimum, but we are not below the maximum, we'll hit false on this branch, which goes to this scenario here. And for that, we want to do the same thing we did for the other two. And the scroll offset we plug into that guy is the get scroll offset of end return value. That is all 3 scenarios taken care of. So now we know if we are at the start, in the middle, or at the end of the scroll box. I've done additional logic at the end of the scroll box. So once we reach the end, I manually remove this screen from the parent, the credit screen from the parent, meaning we destroy the credits widget. Then I spawn the main menu screen widget and add it to the viewport. Again, with this, the alternative is you just remove this from parent. If you're using the method where the main menu screen widget was never destroyed, you don't have to create a new one. That point, event tick is up and working. And now we can actually go over what I was talking to you about earlier with those paddings. So there's no padding on the scroll box, there's no padding on the vertical box, but the elements in the box here could have padding depending on how you want your credits to look. So let me explain that. Let's go to our first element here, which is my Patreon supporters text. Now, I want the text to start at the bottom below the screen so it scrolls up. To do this, what I've done is I've taken the size of the scroll box. The size of the scroll box is 925. So I know that if I pad the top of this text by 925 pixels, and the text is not otherwise offset, it is going to be at the very bottom of the scroll box. So it can spawn at the lowest point. Mathematically, that just makes sense. And so it will start down at the bottom of the scroll box and then move up based on the logic we just put in tick. Great. That works well. But the problem is, when we pad things like that, we don't know where the ending is of the scroll box, so our text could end in the middle. Now, the vertical box makes the scroll box smart enough. So if we have elements under this, we don't have to add any padding on the bottom. Okay, you can see that I have my text and it ends down here. I don't have a line under this. And yet it doesn't just automatically end the credits, it spawns the next one, the YouTube membership supporters text. Now with this, I've given it an arbitrary value of 350 padding. That is just completely up to me. I decided that so that the text would not be directly next to each other. I just use this value to separate the pieces of text a little bit. If I use 0 here for 350 on the top, and I go into my credits and I start speeding them up, when we get to the end of the Patreon, you see that the YouTube membership is directly under it, which doesn't look the best. So I've given it that padding of 350. But again, that is just my personal preference. That is entirely up to you how you handle every other padding. The initial one, that is the only case where I had to put that 925 padding, or the padding that is the size Y of the scroll box. Now, the other note that I want to make here is that you saw that I had a lot of extra spaces here in my content text block. This is because if I don't have spaces here, and I just have it end at the bottom of the text on my last element in my vertical box. Now I will scroll through my text. We'll get to our YouTube membership, and it ends early. It ended early because we technically reached the maximum value of the scroll offset. Okay, so let me slow it down when we get here. Now the last element is coming up soon. And as soon as that is fully within frame, we have reached the end of the scroll box, so it is deleted. So I was using spaces here to kind of manually pad that. Alternatively, you can pad it by as much as you want. So a smart way to do this would be to pad the bottom by the size of the scroll box. You can use the padding bottom here as 925 because 925 is my size Y of my scroll box. So now if I go into my credits, I can scroll through them. And you'll see there is padding here, which it will wait until the final credit is out, and then it will end. If you want to give yourself a little bit more time, because that was pretty quick, you could add an arbitrary value to the end of that as well, such as 950. And that'll give you a little bit more time so it doesn't just completely snap back to the main menu. In the future, we're also going to add animations like a fade out before we load to the main menu widget, or a fade in to the main menu widget. So don't worry too much about that drastic change, but you can get your timing done pretty well using this method. And so there you go. Now you actually understand what these paddings can be used for, and you can make it so that you don't have to have a bunch of extra characters or arbitrary values in your text boxes. Just want to show you guys that as an example, and this will help you customize your credits a lot more. You can do a lot more with that. Now, the last thing we need to go over is the controls while using the credits. So speeding up the credits, slowing down the credits, and skipping the credits. In event construct, again, you might have this event when you come into the widget, but if you don't, or you got rid of it, just type in event construct here and select this. You'll get this node right here. Now we're just going to do a simple one. We're going to use the same function 5 different times here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to listen for input action, meaning I'm going to listen for an input by the user under a specific action mapping. And then we're going to make our own custom events that do whatever it is we want to do when that input is pressed or released. So the first one, let's do speed up the credits. Let's call listen for input action. And you'll get this node right here. Now, it has an action name, and that is the action mapping, or essentially the button or input that we want to press to call this event. So if you go to your project settings, then go to input, you can see all your action mappings. We set these up a long time ago in the tutorial for a lot of them. Some of them we had more recently. But regardless, I have specific menu controls. These controls exist mainly to not be rebound in case we change other controls. Like if we change our actual combat controls, we may want our menu controls to be the same. Entirely up to you guys how you set that up. And we've set this up in other episodes. Main thing I want to show you here is that I have a menu up P1 and menu down P1. So I have a gamepad input and a keyboard input. I want to take these names. You can copy them, or you can just remember what you put for them and use them as the action names. Doesn't matter which one you use here. For me, I want to use menu up P1 and menu down P1. I'll actually put menu up P1 here. Let's put menu down P1 here. And so if I'm pressing down, I'm speeding it up. It's like I'm trying to get to the bottom faster. If I'm pressing up, it's going to be slowing it down because it's like I don't want to get to the bottom yet. Once you've entered the name, you have to choose the event type, which in this case is going to be pressed. So when we press any of those keys related to menu down P1, we want to then call this event. This callback section at the bottom of this node here, you can drag off of that and type add custom event right here. And then you can name this event whatever you want. So I always give it a name that relates to what we're doing. So I'm speeding up the credits. And as long as these are connected, when this input is pressed or an input related to this mapping is pressed, we'll call this event. At this point, it's super simple because all we want to do now is change our scroll speed. Remember, I set it to a default value of 100, which you can now change, by the way. I'm going to leave it at 100, but when I'm speeding it up, I'm going to set it to be 400 instead. So I can just drag scroll speed in, set it, and give it a value, such as 400. Now, from here, it's super simple to do the rest of this. We're going to do another listen for input action, and like I said, this one's menu up P1. The callback off this is slow down credits, so I'm going to set the scroll speed to 25. When I release either the up or the down key or input, I also want the credits to return to their normal speed. So I've added 2 more listen for input actions, and I've called this event return to normal scroll speed. Okay, so I have menu down P1, menu up P1, and the event types are IE released, not pressed. So when we release the down input or we release the up input, I have multiple callbacks going to the same event. This is perfectly fine. You can have as many callbacks as you want going into the same event. So if we release down or we release up, what we do is we reset the scroll speed to 100, which is my default value for scroll speed. Lastly, I have the button that skips the credits or exits the credits, and that is going to be my menu confirm P1. I forgot to show that to you, but in my project settings again, I have menu confirm P1 right here, and I have button on the keyboard, button on the gamepad. And this is a press again, not a release. So when I press the confirm button, I want to call this exit credits event. And from here, I did the same thing that I did earlier. Remove from parent, create the main menu, and add that to the viewport. I just added a sound effect as well, noting that this was an optional, a chosen skipping of the credits. The credits did not end on their own. So you'll notice if I play the credits and I zoom through them, but I don't skip them, there will be no sound when the credits are finished. But if I am to go into the credits and skip them, then a sound plays. Alternatively, if you don't care so much about that, you could just make a function with this in it and call that function. At this point, you should be able to do everything with your credit screen that you could possibly want to do for a basic credit screen. We can add animation, we could add movies, we could add other things in here that you may want to add, and we are probably going to add in the future because they could definitely be spiced up. But this is going to be all of our logic for our credits that we need right now. Anyway, guys, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope it helped you make a credit screen for your game, and I hope you're excited about what you can do with that. If it did, please subscribe. It does more for my channel and myself than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. It's completely free. Everyone you saw in those credits were Patreon members and YouTube membership subscribers. You've gone the extra mile to support this game and the tutorials in general, and I just want to give a huge shout out again to you. Thank you for everything you've done. I really appreciate it. I'm going to try and do more for you guys in the future, so stay tuned, and thank you once again. If you had any issues with this tutorial or just any questions about how you want to implement a certain feature in your game, feel free to join the Discord community. It's completely free, and there's a link in the description. Anyway, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.